Okay, hi everyone. My name is Tyler J. McCall. I am an Instagram marketing strategist, and I help folks use Instagram in a more genuine and intentional way to grow their business and grow their impact online. I've been doing this since 2015, which feels really crazy now. I got my start in the online space as a social media marketer, helping people market their own brands, and then moved on to coaching people around social media strategy. And now I run an online community called the Follower to Fan Society, where we create educational material and resources for entrepreneurs and small business owners. So yeah, that's what I do now. Before I did this, I spent nearly 10 years in the nonprofit world doing marketing, operations, membership, sales, volunteer recruitment, fundraising, development, all the things in the nonprofit and political and community organizing world. So I pull from all that experience with what I do today.
Amazing. All of the talent right here, like all the things. I love it. So how did you start to become, because I think of you as like a social media expert, right? When it comes to, especially Instagram in particular. So what kind of sparked your interest in wanting to hone in on like Instagram strategy and really becoming an expert in that specific platform?
Oh, I love that question. And thanks for calling me an expert. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I have always been a social media lover, like going back to like high school. I loved it when not a lot existed. This was back in the days of like Zynga and like LiveJournal, right? Like early
I remember
2000s.
MySpace. Like I had like a really awesome like MySpace background. It like kind of like,
Oh yeah,
like glittery. That was my
the
jam.
music autoplayed, like everything, right? Those were the days. You would like have fights with your friends about who you knocked out of your top eight. The drama of it all.
Yes.
Simpler times, right? So I loved it back then. And then when I got into college, I really started, and the work I was doing, I started working with like nonprofits, working with the YMCA in particular. And I just kind of became that person because I was the young one, and I would always like be on my computer or on my phone. And I was like the person who just kind of did the social media thing. So it started with Facebook, like running Facebook accounts for like causes I was working on or businesses I worked for. And then from there, just time went on, and I really started using Instagram more personally when Instagram first came out. And then I actually launched a handmade business in 2015, and I used Instagram for that business. It was called Mr. McCall's Fine Fragrances. And Instagram was like the only thing I really knew how to do, the only thing I had access to. I didn't have any money to spend on ads or anything like that. I started using Instagram, started selling my product online that way, and then just really saw how successful it was and how much it works. And then from there, I started working with local businesses doing their social media. But whenever they asked me like, where should we be? What should we be doing? I always said, let's try Instagram. Instagram could work really well for you. And I just fell in love with it as a platform. You know, I think compared to other platforms, it's a lot more fun. I love the visual aspect of it. It's a lot more engaging. I know I find so much community, so many relationships on Instagram. And when we look at the stats across the board, Instagram is the most engaging platform of all social media platforms. The most engagement happens there. So it's really a win-win for me and most of my students. They just see incredible results on Instagram. And I love it.
I love it. Yeah. And I said before, I definitely feel like Instagram can be the platform we love to hate, because we do like, it's the very first social media app that I'll open on my phone. And I feel like a lot of you guys out there are probably in the same boat, right? It's the first one you pick up, you're scrolling through the feed, you're scrolling through stories, you're watching those, and we get sucked in to like the time warp of, we're on Instagram for a really long time. We are hopefully like getting to build community and getting to connect with others. But then on the business side of things, we can also see frustrations with it. We feel like the algorithms changed, or we're not seeing like the growth that we want. So I definitely feel like it is the like love to hate social media platform right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel that. And just because you're right, it has changed so much, especially in like since Insta stories came out. But even I would say in the past like 12 months, 12 to 18 months, I feel like it's changed more than ever before.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So speaking specifically about Instagram story, because that's what I really wanted to like hone in on with you, because I think you're really great at Instagram stories. And I think that that's something that a lot of us out there, we either struggle with understanding how can we really use Insta story to promote our business and not just be like, hey, behind the scene, or I don't know, like, is it just like just for like
Mm-hmm.
the quick little boomerang with your Starbucks coffee, or is it actually like useful to book clients and bring in revenue for your business? So I'd love to like talk some about that. So how,
Yeah.
for you, like in your opinion, how important is using Instagram story for business growth?
Okay, such a good question. You know, I believe with the way that Instagram has gone and the way that it's really kind of functioning now, that Instagram stories are now the most important feature of Instagram.
Mm.
And I like to think of all the different things within Instagram as like a platform within a platform. So when we think about social media platforms, Instagram is a platform. But within Instagram, we have 4 unique places where we can create content. So the feed, stories, live, and IGTV now. So we have 4 places where we can create and share content. And Instagram stories just continues to prove to be the most popular platform within Instagram. So a majority of Instagram's daily users are creating and consuming Instagram stories now. Instagram stories, on average, leads to 1 in 5 Instagram stories leads to a direct message, which is a huge opportunity for us as business owners and content creators, because those DMs are where we can actually start doing the work of getting to know our ideal customer or client, figuring out how we can best serve them, and then offering our product or service to them. And Instagram stories are just this new, even though they've been around for over 2 years now, right? There's still this like newness to them as a way to create and consume content. So I think they're really the most important feature of Instagram. And if you're not using them, then you're really missing out on this incredible opportunity to connect with your audience.
I love it. And it's so true when I think about like why it has that newness factor. So like, I feel like we all act like it just launched yesterday. Like every day, that's how we feel when it comes to Instagram story. But Instagram is doing a really good job of constantly adding things to Instagram story that we want, whether it's like the GIFs or like a fun new feature, or like super zoom, or I don't like all of these like random things you can do to like beef up your Instagram story is really fun for people. And I feel like specifically our generation, and probably a lot of our ideal clients, we're not finding them on Snapchat, but like they're using Insta story like they would a Snapchat, like that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Which
Yeah.
really
And that whole kind of genre of content that expires in 24 hours and that's in the vertical story format is really leading. And, you know, actually the chief marketing officer for Facebook has said that he predicts by early 2019 that the story format will be the most popular format for consuming content, just because it's, as soon as Instagram ripped off Snapchat and introduced it, it has just grown like in crazy ways. So I think we're going to continue to see, and you're so right, like these new features, it does make it seem like every couple of days there's like a new fun thing we can do.
Yeah, I know. Great. I always see that button, so I'm clicking like, okay, new. What's new today? Like, what are you doing now, Instagram?
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah.
So so we have like established that Instagram story is really important, right? We should be using it for our business. So everyone out there, if you're fearful of using it or you haven't used it yet, we're going to give you a challenge to use it today when you get off of here. Use Instagram story. But what do you feel like we should be sharing on Instagram story when it comes to our business, and how can we kind of bridge that gap between the personal aspect of using Instagram story and like the fun, like puppy dog filters and things like that, and then actually talking about business and again, bringing in like making that a revenue stream for our business?
Totally. Okay. So I think the first thing is to recognize that Instagram stories are going to work the best for you and your business when you treat them as stories, truly as stories. So we're going to go back to elementary school really quickly, and we're going to remember what we learned, and that is the fact that all good stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. So whenever we're creating our content, whether it's personal content or business-related content or valuable content that's educating or inspiring or informing or entertaining our audience, we're going to make sure that we always introduce the story, that we're giving it context, and we're letting our followers know what they're going to learn, what they're going to see, what they're going to experience. And then we're going to deliver upon that expectation through the content we create, through our photos, our videos, our boomerangs, our graphics, our text on screen, whatever it may be. And then we're always going to wrap it up at the end. So when I say we're going to create a complete story, that can either be a an Instagram story that you do just sitting at your desk where it's just 2 or 3 little videos of you talking about a topic, or it could be an entire day process of you setting up for a wedding or event, or it could be a little educational bit where you just take them through your studio and show them what it looks like to work with you or how the product is made. Whatever you're doing, you're always introducing it, giving it context, delivering upon that context, and then wrapping it up at the end. And the reason this is so vitally important is because everything about social media is everything about how people consume content is based in habit. So Kat, you said it perfectly. Instagram is the first social media platform that you go to. Like when you open your phone, that is the thing that you go to, that you tap on, right? And then when you go into Instagram, you have habits based on how you consume content. So you're typically, for me, it's like the first thing I do is go and check my DMs, and I start working through those, and I go back and watch some stories, and I go check notifications. So you have to think about how your follower is consuming content, how it's a part of their habit. And what happens when we create Instagram stories that don't have context at the beginning, that don't deliver on the context, and that don't wrap it up at the end, is we start to train our audience that they're always going to be confused when they watch our story, or they're never going to know how it ended up, or they're never going to get anything out of our story. So what are they going to do? They're going to stop paying attention to you. And that is the quickest way to make sure that Instagram will not work for you in your business, because that attention is the only thing that you have as you start building a relationship with someone on social media. And when you are creating subpar content that loses that attention, you are losing the potential customer or client right there. So it seems so simple, right? So basic. Oh, it needs a beginning and a middle and an end. But without a beginning, middle, and end, you're not going to get far with your Instagram story strategy. So that's like the first big idea about Instagram stories, like create a freaking story.
Right. Like make sure. And I think that's so helpful, because I feel like even for me, sometimes I forget the end part. Right. Yeah. I can be really good at like getting it started and like giving them a little bit more, especially I'm thinking like on wedding day, I need to like wrap it up. I need to be like, the wedding ended, or like the wedding happened. This is what's happening next. Like that sort of thing, versus just showing some of the behind the scenes and then never actually fulfilling like the promise, right? Fulfilling like the rest of the story. So that is so good. Caitlin, I agree. I'm glad that we can go back and watch the replay to like write down all of those things. Yeah, that was really good.
And I would love to take the example, if you're up for, of a wedding planner and thinking of some Insta stories that that business owner could create. Because I love that you said to finishing out the day, because I think a really valuable Instagram story for a planner to create would be the cleanup from an event, right? Because I want you to think about the stories you can create that are not just, here's the thing, Instagram stories that are going to work really well for you aren't just hey, I'm so-and-so, this is what I do, this is how to book me. Instead, it's the stories that are going to address the beliefs and the thoughts of your ideal customer or client. So what do they need to know or think or believe before they actually click the button to inquire with you, or sign on the dotted line, or send you that check for $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, right, for your service? What do they need to think, know, and believe before they do that? And then what are the things, what are the services that you're providing? What are the gaps that you're filling? What are the needs that you're meeting that may seem really like simple to you, but that are mind blowing to other people? So for example, the cleanup part, right? So my partner, Eric, and I are planning a wedding, which is very exciting. I know it's not like very publicly discussed, but like it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And one thing I've been thinking about is we're doing a really unique thing where we're like doing a house for a week with our closest friends, doing a really unique ceremony, all this kind of stuff. And we, so he and I just got back. We were in Canada for 2 weeks, and we spent a week at a cottage in Canada with some of our close friends. And cleanup was a nightmare. There were like 20 of us staying in this house, and it came time to check out, and we had to clean up, and it was just a nightmare. And I was thinking, I'm so excited for like our wedding and things that are going to happen, but I'm not cleaning up. So who do I need to pay to make this happen? So that's a really great story, right? Like there are all these things that have to happen after a wedding. That's a really great story you could have on your Insta story. You don't
It's
have to.
so true. Tyler, you like challenged me. So my next wedding, I'm gonna be like, Tyler, this is for you, and like show that.
Yeah.
Even like for other, like I'm thinking even like explaining or like showing a fun thing about getting the gifts out to the car or boxing up the top tier of the cake and like taking that out. Like some of those things that we like as planners, this is what I do for all of my clients, every single wedding, regardless. I mean, unless they don't want to save the top tier of their cake, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
For the most part, this is what I'm doing for all of my clients. So I should be documenting it and showing it. So same thing for all like you other business owners out there, whether it's photography and like showcasing, okay, what happens after? You know, what does that process look like for you after the wedding day or after the engagement session? And what are you doing to like when you're delivering those like the images and things like that? I think that could be super cool and like really helpful to truly like show an end and like wrap up that story.
Yeah. And I think the best content especially on social media, is the content that demonstrates how big the need is or how large the gap is and how beneficial your product or service is in filling that gap.
Yes.
So for you as a wedding planner, it's like, okay, who is taking care of that bucket of sand with all the sparklers in it after the wedding? Like who is taking all the trash out? Who's making sure that you actually get your deposit back on your venue? Who is getting all the tape off the ceiling from where you taped up whatever because you wanted some crazy thing on the, you know, like who's taking care of all these things, right? You don't think of it. You're trying to go off and enjoy your honeymoon and also take those shoes off that you've been wearing for 12 hours, right? Like that's what you're trying to do.
Right.
You want to think about that. So that's where a wedding planner fits in. So by creating that content that is saying like, these are all the things that I do, so you don't have to think about them. And Kat, I always use, I don't know if you know this, but I always use you as a great example of like how to craft like a, like your services page is a sales page, not just a services page, and how you really clearly like kind of demonstrate all the gaps and like what it looks like to have a planner. And then you're very clear on like the messaging you use. Those are all things yeah, of course. Those are all things you can pull over onto Instagram and your Instagram stories. That just and here's the thing, y'all, that content does the work of selling for you without you actually having to ask someone for the sale.
I love that.
That's the valuable content.
It's so good too, y'all, I think, and just for your own businesses and your own examples of just like what you were saying, Tyler, of you're making it a need, right? And we talk about that a lot in terms of just selling. We talked about that in the coffee chats. Gosh, it's been a couple months now with Lauren where we talked about selling and how we can not be afraid of that. But a big key to selling is turning a want into a need and allowing your ideal clients to see it's so gray. Like they can't really see want versus need. Everything like blurs together and they're just like, oh, well, I want / need it. Like I have to have it kind of thing. So it's almost thinking about what are even like the unglamorous things that you do, but that show your client, hey, this now, see, I'm in need because I'm doing all of these things that you don't want to do or you don't have time to do or whatever it might be. And then allowing them to just want to book you because they're seeing that. So that's really, really good advice. I love that a lot.
So definitely as you're thinking about creating those Instagram stories that are going to do the work of like driving revenue for you, it's creating the stories that are the behind the scenes, but that are behind the scenes in such a way that it is doing that turning it into a need. And then I think it's also creating the content that is really demonstrating your expertise in the field or in the space or your niche. That's really important. Stories that talk about your why. So getting back to the root of what you do, because that is something that is inherently you, that sets you apart. And then stories that are giving value as well, that are really helping your follower fill those gaps before they actually inquire with you or book you or buy your product or book your service. So that's more content you can share. So there's really so much potential on Instagram stories. And, you know, a lot of what I'm doing teaching my students now is we're shifting our focus. We're posting in the feed, of course, you know, but maybe only like 2 or 3 times a week. Whereas before we were doing it every single day. But then we're showing up on Instagram stories every single day because that's where we can do the real work of getting in front of our followers, and we can lead to a direct message. We can always lead to a conversation, which is so important.
It is. It's super important. And something, well, let's like, because this kind of like leads into the next question I was thinking, but do you think that the content that we share on the feed needs to be the content that we're sharing on Instagram stories? And what I mean by that is like on the same day. Like, should we be like, okay, well, on Mondays, you might sit down and be like, okay, this is like what I want to talk about like on Monday on Instagram story, on Tuesday, like you kind of map out like a little bit of a schedule for yourself. And then do you make sure that the feed is the exact same stuff that you're sharing in stories, or do you alternate certain things?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on kind of your approach to how specific and strategic you are with what you're doing. I think there's totally a benefit to kind of having that congruency between the content, but you don't have to. You don't have to. Like I know for some folks that may feel overwhelming of like, oh my gosh, I have to like match all this and that. You
Right.
definitely don't have to. But there is this concept of a feedback loop that I teach my students, and I've talked about before, of having all your content feed into each other. So your feed should feed back up to your stories should feed back out to your feed, and kind of creating that whole system on Instagram where your follower is intimately connected with all of your content. So you build that stronger relationship. There's totally value in doing that, but you also don't have to do that. With the introduction of highlights, it makes it easier. Used to, it was kind of tough because we would post in the feed and then be like, check out my story, but then it's gone.
Then it's gone. Right.
Yeah, right. But now we can slap it in the highlights, and that helps a little bit. So yeah, I think there's totally space to do that, and it can really help you amplify your impact that way. But you don't have to necessarily be hung up on that either. You know, if you feel like, oh my God, that's too restrictive, you don't have to do that.
That's awesome. It's good to know that there's definitely like wiggle room depending on everyone's style and just personality.
Yeah.
I know I didn't like ask you this prior to jumping on this call, but I just thought of this question. So hopefully you won't mind if I put you on the spot.
I love it.
Let's talk about highlights for a second, because that's a newer feature that they've brought up, and that has to do with Instagram story. And I feel like I kind of feel like I see 50-50. Like I see business owners using it, but then I also see business owners not using it. So I know you just brought it up as like a great way to kind of keep that loop going and allow your follower to become a fan, right? To really be able to stay a part of your Instagram community and what you're developing. So then I'm going to assume we're going to go with like, yes, highlights are important. We should be using them, but how do we know what to use as a highlight on our Instagram?
Oh, yeah, such a good question. So I approach highlights from just one perspective, and that is, what are the questions that I need to answer for someone when they first come to my profile that will help them decide whether or not to follow me?
I love it.
Like that's the main thing. So thinking of, you really have kind of 3 places to impact a potential follower, and that is your bio, which y'all, this is like, we could literally spend an hour talking about bios because y'all are not, and I'm saying this very generally and broadly, but like y'all are not fully utilizing them. They are one of the most important features of Instagram, and people just like slap stuff up there and they don't do a lot of work with them. But it's really, the bio is make or break a lot of times for getting new followers. Then the feed is the next thing, right? So what does feed look like and feel like? And then the highlights. So I hear some folks are doing a really neat approach to highlights, and they're like modeling their highlights after their website navigation. So that's a cool way to think about it. Like, what are the top questions someone has when they come to your site? When I'm thinking about highlights, I typically definitely want an introduction highlight up there somewhere so people can really quickly and easily learn who I am. I want something that gives some value in a highlight. So for me, I have like a free stuff highlight that has like my opt-in and a masterclass and a free thing here and a podcast interview there, so that you could do something like that. And then I have personality stuff like midday dance breaks, Target runs, like funny things, like Real Housewives, whatever. Like that's kind of the other little bucket of content that I have with what I'm doing. I'm at a really unique place in my business where I teach Instagram, but I rarely talk about Instagram on my Instagram, which is really odd, but that's like how it's kind of worked out now. So I have some educational content about that, but it's more like personality, who I am, and then some free stuff on my highlights.
I love it. And I was talking with a friend the other day too, kind of about highlights and what we should have and shouldn't have. And something that we were even thinking about too was making sure that people can clearly see in the highlights what we do. So for an example, not even just being like wedding planning, but like for my Catchmoyer one, I have a highlight that's creative at heart. I have a highlight that's DSE. I have a highlight that's coaching. I wanted to have a highlight for each of almost like those revenue streams, each of the things that I do, so that somebody who I want to follow me can be like, well, who is this girl? Like, what's going on? What could she do for me? And they can see those like various things too. So that's just a different, someone who maybe is like a calligrapher. You could have one that's like envelope hand lettering. You could have one that's invitation. You could even have some of those different things and allow people to see that, which I think could be really cool.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think it really just, I want everyone to, and I've been talking about this a ton lately. I think this is my second or third interview today when I'm going to say this, and that is the fact that like Instagram is not a traffic driving platform. And I think the sooner we all accept that for what it is, and we recognize that, that is going to give us so much more space and freedom to use Instagram the way it is intended. And that is a place to share really incredible content with a really specific person and build a relationship with them and build a community around that content. Like that's what Instagram does really well. So I love this idea of like showcasing these different types of products that you do or different services that you offer as a way to very clearly say, this is who I'm for, this is what I do. If you don't like it, go away.
Right.
If you like it, stick around. We're going to be BFFs on Instagram.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I love the little soapbox for that. I'm all for it.
I'll put my soapbox away for a minute.
I'm all for it. Okay, so back to the questions that I like said, hey, let's talk about these. That was just a little highlight derail there. Do you find, and I feel like I already know the answer to this based on how this conversation has gone, but do you find more engagement on your Insta stories versus your feed?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I find more valuable engagement on Insta stories than the feed. The first thing is like my feed engagement is fine. I know a lot of people are like, engagement's down, the algorithm, rah, rah, rah. My engagement's fine. And I see a lot of other people like, engagement's fine. Just do whatever. I think a lot of the decrease in engagement a lot of us are experiencing is because of changing user habits, not because of a changing algorithm. So just realizing people are binging Insta stories instead of mindlessly scrolling. So that change in habit means that there's not as many people in the feed to engage with your stuff. But the more valuable engagement for me on Instagram is 1000% coming from Instagram stories. Instagram stories allow me to better understand my ideal customer or client on a regular basis because I can ask them questions directly. They allow me to build a relationship that is rooted in trust and mutual respect for one another because there is this constant communication with my audience through Instagram stories, through DMs. And they allow me to sell really effortlessly through Instagram stories by presenting my products or services in a specific way for a specific type of person, and then inviting them to learn more about that product or service, and then having a conversation about whether or not it's a good fit, what it would look like for them to invest and to come to this event or to buy this membership, whatever it may be, and then giving them the resources they need to make that investment. So that's all happening for me on Instagram stories. I love it.
It's a lot of things that are good. Like those are all like really, really good things and ways that we need to just get more comfortable with it. So how often should we post on Instagram story?
If you can do it every single day, do it every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. I think, again, just because of the way that people are consuming content has changed, and it's a story since they're only there for 24 hours. If you can be there every single day, it's going to help you get a lot further. And here's the other thing. People are always like, our Instagram story is going to help me grow my following. No, that's not what they do. That's not their goal. Also, just posting in your feed with a bunch of hashtags doesn't help you grow your following anymore either. Okay, so stop doing that. You grow your following by going out and finding potential followers and engaging with them. That's how you do it. Instagram stories are all about nurturing that relationship and making it stronger and stronger and stronger. So that consistency is what really helps you do that.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So what's like your number one tip for somebody who's like, okay, I'm an Instagram newbie or Instagram like story newbie. I don't, post a lot in stories. What would be your number one tip for what they should do first or how they can kind of jump in?
Yeah. So I would get out a clean piece of paper and I would maybe divide it into fifths. So kind of have 5 columns on that paper. And in each column, think of a different kind of bucket or category of content that you can create for Instagram stories. Have maybe 5 separate ones. And then start thinking about how you can combine them. But about 3 to 5 is kind of the range there. And then under each of those buckets, start putting your content ideas. So for example, Kat, you could have one entire bucket of content that is day of. Like, what is the day for Dear Sweetheart events? So what does day of look like? And under that, you can have a venue set up. You could have working with other vendors. You could have how you like working with the caterer. I mean, you could have an Instagram story about every single thing, like how
Right.
your planner should work with your photographer, how your planner should work with your caterer, how, all those things. And then you can have cleanup, you can have tear down, you can have, like, those are all different stories under that.
I love it.
You could have an entire kind of bucket of content around services, right? Where you just have different stories where you talk about your services, where you feature client testimonials, where you talk about what it looks like to work with you, right? That's all those ideas. So just create those 5 buckets of content that really connect well with your business, that are in line with your business and your business goals, your objectives on Instagram, but they're also going to connect with your followers. So that's where some of that personal content needs to come in, where some of the Target run, or for me, like Target is a whole bucket of content. I talk about Target, going to Target, saving money at Target, what I bought at Target. I'll do a Target haul on Instagram Live, like those types of things, because that's kind of a point of contact and relationship, common ground with my audience. So create those 5 buckets, and then get your calendar out and just commit to going on Instagram stories maybe twice a week for a month, 3 times a week for a month, and then start building that muscle of doing it consistently until you can get to a place of doing it every single day or 5 days a week, whatever that may be. And then as you're starting to create the stories, because I know a lot of people are like, okay, I've never done a story before. How do I create a really impactful story? Well, literally just create a storyboard, right? And say, okay, I'm going to talk about this today. Get some sticky notes out, put them on your wall, and say, I'm going to start with this. I'm going to do this next. I'm going to have a video here, then a photo here. And you're not going to do this forever, but maybe the first couple of times you are, just until you get really confident and you know the flow for your Instagram stories. And then it gets easier and easier for you.
I love that. And I think what's really helpful about that for everybody out there is that if we have a plan, we're more likely to do it, because you have this strategic plan to walk you through what that process looks like. At the business intensive that Megan and I just hosted, we actually created a content calendar. Like, we walked everybody through creating a content calendar for the next 3 months. And we included Instagram story as its very own thing. So we did blog, newsletter, Instagram feed, Instagram story, like very different things. And that's something that we forget. Right? We don't always plan out like, okay, what do I want to share in stories like this week? We think through like, oh, I have a new blog post up. I'll pop on and like talk about it for a hot second. Or I'm at a wedding, so it's easy to do like behind the scenes. But it's those other days where we're not necessarily thinking about those content buckets, just like you said. So brainstorming out like, what are those content buckets? What are those categories that I want to talk about in my business, that I want my brand to be known for? And then let me just make each one a separate day. And then fire away at it. And it can actually then be super easy and become like this really lighthearted, like you're just chatting for 10 minutes about that specific topic and you're done. There's your Insta story.
Yeah, it's so easy. And it becomes that system. It becomes that habit for you. And then it becomes a habit for your followers, because they know to expect it. And then they're really happy when it's there for them. So it works so well.
That's
and
awesome.
Another thing too, I wanted to just touch on this really quickly is, I'm kind of on this like campaign. Let me get my soapbox out really quickly again. I'm on this campaign right now of telling people to stop using all of your like energy and the relationship you have on Instagram. Stop using all that to always send people off of Instagram. Because that is like a big, I see people all the time, like they write this incredible blog post, it's incredibly valuable, and then they slap it in their bio or on their link tree, and then they just go, I have a new thing, go click the link in my bio. And like, who knows if they're going to do it? You can see on your analytics, and like, it may not be a ton. So why don't you instead take that content and put it on your Instagram story? Talk about it on your Instagram story, or go live on Instagram and talk through it, or do some long form captions in the feed, and bring the content to your audience instead of always trying to send your audience out of Instagram to the content.
I love it.
It's going to be so much more valuable for them.
And it doesn't mean to like add on to your soapbox, my soapbox, because I love it too. Yeah. It doesn't mean that like I get tired when I hear people say blogging is dead. No, just because people aren't going from Instagram to your blog doesn't mean that blogging is dead. Your blog is useful for Pinterest. It's useful for SEO, like there's so many other things. So still put that exact same content on your
Exactly.
blog, send it out to, like, break it apart to send in your newsletter, have those pens circulating on Pinterest. And then that, what you've broken out, even for like the newsletter, pop that into various Instagram stories, Instagram posts, live, whatever that might be. So then your one bucket of content can be broken and like used on all of those platforms so easily, rather than sitting here trying to reinvent the wheel with like all of this new content all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you said that. And I had a student inside the Follower to Fan Society recently. We were doing a hot seat call, and she was blogging. She was a regular blogger. And I think I looked at her website. She had like 20 or 30 blogs that she's done in the past year or so. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. I've done like 4 in like the past 5 years. I was looking at her blog content because she was saying she didn't really have any content for like Insta stories, or she didn't know what to do. And a good number of her blog posts were listicles. They were like top 10 reasons why, top 4 things, top 12 this. And I looked through her content and I said, you literally have like 40 to 50 Instagram posts on your blog right now. Like they're done. It's just a copy and paste job. Like copy, paste, find a picture. You're done. You've already created the content. Why are you making this so hard for yourself? Or take that content, that top 12 list, and those are 12 different Instagram stories across the course of a month or 2 months or 3 months, where you can like dive into each of those topics more intentionally.
Right.
And that content's already there for you. I'm sure most of you listening, like you have a blog post, or you have a newsletter, or you have an Instagram caption or a Google Doc where you've dumped a bunch of ideas, and those content ideas are there. They're waiting for you just to start putting them out there.
I think that's so smart, because we try to reinvent the wheel way too much, in my opinion. And then we're just spinning our wheels and we're exhausted because our to-do list is already piled high. But then now we're adding and like trying to create new content when we already have really incredible content available. And you don't even have to say in those Instagram stories, like, this is on the blog. No, just share that one post. Like, act like it wasn't on the blog. You're not like lying about it. You're just talking to them through Instagram stories, just like you were saying, rather than saying like, this is on the blog, click here. Like, go this way. And I'm such a, like, I do that all the time. I'm like, link in bio. They don't go to the link in bio. Like, they hang out in my stories. Like, I need to just stop putting hashtag link in bio on all of those stories, because it's not helpful, but I do it. But instead, like you're saying, like, just give them some of that content right there. And then they're going to keep going back. They're going to consider you an expert in whatever it is that you're sharing about, and you're increasing like those content buckets. One last tip, just because I'm thinking of it and I want to give it out to everyone. When Megan and I were at the intensive and we were talking with our attendees through the content buckets, we use that same same terminology, which I love. Something that is just helpful for everybody to remember, those content buckets that like Tyler was talking about, when you break that paper into like 5 days, if you're doing like Monday through Friday, they're the same content buckets you can share on your blog, the same content buckets you can share on your email newsletter list. Like, it's the same content buckets throughout all of your brand and all of your business. That's like your cornerstone content. It's the content you want to be known for as a business owner and as an expert in whatever it is. Again, even at that, like the personal, like Target stuff. Like, I think of Target, I think of Tyler. Like, hopefully when people think of like Pink, they think of me. Like, it can be like personality things, but it can also be the strategy that you use. And then the strategy content buckets, they're the ones you're blogging about, as well as utilizing on Insta stories. So don't feel like you have to have all of these crazy buckets going around and like your roof is leaking because you've got so many buckets and you can't like keep up with it. Have like 5 buckets. They are your core buckets, and just how can you use them across all of your content marketing efforts, and it will like change your business. Okay.
I love it.
No more content marketing, because that wasn't even like the topic. But Brooke had a good question. So yeah, guys, we'll kind of go into like the Q&A portion. So if y'all have any specific questions for Tyler or things that we didn't answer, please pop them into this like ask a question section. Brooks is, I have seen people using hashtags in their stories. Do you recommend doing that? Is there value in that?
Oh, such a good question. Okay, so adding hashtags and locations to your stories does sometimes help you get more views on your stories, but it doesn't necessarily translate into follower growth. So you can totally do it. You may get a bump in your views, but other than that, it's not incredibly beneficial for like growing your following or growing your reach or things like that. Just because Instagram kind of makes it hard for someone to get to your profile from that. You also can't control like when you show up in that hashtag or whether you show up in that hashtag at all. And something else to consider is if you're creating a story that's like a multi-part story and you put the same hashtag on all of it, like Instagram's going to pick and choose different pieces of that story to feature. So you could do an incredible story with a hashtag and someone who's in that hashtag only sees like 1 or 2 parts of that story, and then they're kind of lost. So you can do it, but it doesn't really help you that much.
That's good to know. I like how you talked about if they just see like a part of your story, like maybe they're just seeing the middle, if they're not seeing the beginning and the end. So then they're just going to get lost even with a hashtag being there. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because we don't know yet, and we probably never will, like how Instagram decides what stories to show in the hashtag and in what order. We don't know any of that stuff. They don't tell us these things. So there's not even like a trick or a hack that I could give you that would help you guarantee you show up in a hashtag. I mean, there's no way. There's no way to figure that out.
Okay. Well, Instagram. We'll let you have that one then, I guess.
Yeah.